A young frontier woman rides home through the snow, only to find her cabin torn apart and her mother gone. The only clue left behind says it all. Her mother was taken as debt payment, in the dead of winter, by a man known for hauling folks away like property. She charges into the storm alone, desperate to save the only family she has left. But when her horse slips on the mountain ice, she nearly freezes to death. She wakes to the crackling of a fire and a mountain man holding a crying baby. He saved her life. But when he hears who took her mother, his face changes. He knows that man. He knows what he's done, and he knows the terrible secret that's riding with that caravan. Now, with a storm at their backs and danger ahead, the woman and the mountain man must face a truth darker than winter itself. But when the trail closes in and the baby grows weak, what will the mountain man trade to save them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered yard as Amanda Whitley made her way home. Her basket, filled with freshly gathered herbs, swung gently at her side. The healing plants had done their work on old Mr. Peterson's sick calf, and she felt a small surge of satisfaction knowing the young animal would survive the bitter winter. The golden light painted the snow in shades of amber, but something about the scene before her made Amanda's steps falter. Their cabin door stood slightly open, swaying in the crisp mountain breeze. Her mother's prized sewing basket lay overturned on the porch, colorful spools of thread scattered like fallen leaves across weathered boards. "Mama?" Amanda called out, her voice sharp with sudden worry. The silence that answered made her heart beat faster. She rushed forward, boots crunching in the deep snow. The closer she got to the cabin, the more her dread grew. Her mother would never leave her sewing exposed to the elements like this. Alma Whitley treated her sewing supplies like precious treasures, because that's exactly what they were. Those careful stitches had helped keep food on their table after Papa died. Amanda reached the porch in 3 long strides, the wooden planks creaking beneath her feet. "Mama, are you here?" Her voice cracked as she pushed the door wider. The sight inside stole her breath. Their simple home, always kept neat as a pin by her mother's careful hands, was in complete disarray. The chairs lay overturned, their sturdy legs pointing accusingly toward the ceiling. Shards of her mother's favorite blue crockery littered the plank floor like broken ice. The curtains her mama had sewn last spring hung torn from one window. "No, no, no," Amanda whispered, moving through the wreckage. Signs of struggle were everywhere. The braided rug kicked askew, Papa's old Bible knocked from its shelf, a fresh crack in the comb table's surface where something, or someone, had struck it hard. Her fingers trembled as she touched the table's scarred wood. That's when she saw the paper, crudely pinned in place with her mother's best sewing needle. Amanda's hands shook as she pulled it free, recognizing the flowing script that had seemed so elegant when Edgar Pike first visited their cabin earlier that week. The words on the page made her blood run cold. Notice of debt collection. Per agreement with the late James Whitley, services of Alma Whitley required as payment for winter provisions supplied in good faith, legal and binding. "You lying snake," Amanda whispered, crumpling the paper in her fist. Her father would never have agreed to such terms. He'd warned them about Pike before he died, called him a serpent in fine clothes who'd squeeze the life from honest folks if they let him. She forced herself to think clearly, despite the panic clawing at her chest. The tracks. She needed to check for tracks before the dying light failed completely. Amanda burst back onto the porch, her eyes scanning the trampled snow of their yard. There, Wagon wheels cut deep grooves from where Pike's caravan had parked days ago, when he'd come calling with his smooth words and false concern for their welfare. Fresh marks showed where the wagon had turned around today, headed back toward the mountain trail. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching snow. Amanda lifted her face to the pewter sky, seeing the heavy clouds gathering above the peaks. A storm was coming, and Pike had her mother. She didn't waste time gathering supplies. Every moment she delayed was another moment Pike put between them. Amanda ran to the lean-to where they kept Daisy, their aging mare. The horse nickered softly as Amanda quickly saddled her, fingers fumbling with buckles in her haste. "I know you're tired, old friend," Amanda murmured, stroking Daisy's neck. "But Mama needs us. We have to go." The mare seemed to understand the urgency in her voice. She stood steady as Amanda mounted, then set off at Amanda's urging toward the mountain trail. The wagon tracks were still visible, though the rising wind had begun to fill them with loose snow. As they climbed higher into the hills, the temperature dropped sharply. Amanda pulled her wool coat tighter around herself, wishing she'd thought to grab her heavy mittens. But there was no turning back now. The thought of her gentle mother in Pike's clutches drove her forward despite the cold. "I'm coming, Mama," she said aloud, her words carried away by the strengthening wind. "I won't let him take you." The trail grew steeper, switching back and forth across the mountainside. In better weather, it served as a trade route between their valley and the next. But now, with snow thick on the ground and more threatening, it was treacherous going. Daisy picked her way carefully, her ears flicking back and forth as she listened to Amanda's quiet words of encouragement. The mare's breath came out in great white plumes, her sides heaving with the effort of the climb. The wind continued to rise as darkness crept in around them. Snow began to fall, just a few flakes at first, then more steadily. Amanda squinted through the growing gloom, struggling to make out the wagon tracks that were their only guide. "We can't lose them," she muttered, leaning forward in the saddle. "We can't." A gust of wind howled through the passes, carrying stinging snow that felt like needles against Amanda's exposed face. Daisy stumbled slightly, her hooves sliding on a patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. Amanda's heart leaped into her throat as she clutched the saddle horn. For a terrifying moment, she felt them tipping toward the drop-off at the edge of the trail. But Daisy regained her footing, snorting in alarm but pressing onward. "Good girl," Amanda gasped, her fingers white-knuckled on the reins. Steady now. The darkness was almost complete now, broken only by the faint silvery light reflecting off the snow. The storm pressed in around them like a living thing, trying to drive them back down the mountain. But Amanda refused to yield. She thought of her mother. Practical, gentle Alma Whitley, who had held their little family together after Papa died. Who had taught Amanda everything she knew about healing herbs and mending wounds, both of the body and the spirit. The woman who still shed quiet tears when she thought Amanda wasn't looking, missing the husband who'd been taken from them too soon. "I will not let you be taken too," Amanda vowed, her words whipped away by the wind. "Whatever it takes, Mama, I'm coming for you." Daisy's next step landed on another patch of ice. The mare's legs went out from under her, and this time there was no recovery. Amanda felt the sickening lurch as the saddle tilted sharply. She clung desperately as Daisy fought to stay upright on the treacherous path. The wind howled louder, drowning out Amanda's startled cry as darkness closed in around them completely. The storm had them now, horse and rider caught in its cruel grip on the narrow mountain trail, with no way forward and no way back. Amanda's world narrowed to the feel of Daisy's heaving sides beneath her legs, the sting of wind-driven snow on her face, and the desperate prayer beating in time with her heart. "Please, Lord, help us find her. Please help us find Mama." The mare's hooves scrabbled against the icy ground as she struggled to regain her footing. Amanda leaned forward, pressing herself against Daisy's neck, trying to help the horse balance. Her fingers were numb where they gripped the reins, but she refused to let go. "Stay with me, girl," she whispered against Daisy's frost-rimed mane. "Just stay with me." The twilight deepened rapidly, turning the white landscape into varying shades of blue-gray shadow. Amanda could barely make out Daisy's ears in front of her as they pushed forward through the strengthening storm. The mare's sides heaved with exhaustion, her steps becoming more uncertain on the treacherous path. "Just a little further," Amanda encouraged, though she had no idea where they were heading in the darkness. The wind howled through the pines, driving needle-sharp crystals of snow against her face. She'd lost all sense of time, knowing only that they needed to keep moving or freeze. Daisy's hooves struck another patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. The mare whinnied in alarm as her back legs slipped toward the edge of the ridge. Amanda felt the sickening lurch as the horse struggled to regain her footing. A powerful gust of wind struck them broadside, and suddenly they were sliding. Amanda caught a glimpse of a fallen pine tree looming in their path before she was thrown from the saddle. She had a moment of weightless terror before striking something hard with the side of her head. Pain exploded behind her eyes as she tumbled through the snow, finally coming to rest against the massive trunk of the fallen tree. The world spun sickeningly as Amanda tried to push herself up. Her fingers felt like ice, refusing to obey her commands. Somewhere nearby, she heard Daisy's frightened nickering, but she couldn't tell which direction it came from. Blood trickled warm down her temple, quickly cooling in the bitter wind. "Have to get up," she mumbled, but her limbs felt leaden. The fallen pine's branches created a small hollow, partially sheltered from the wind. Amanda managed to crawl beneath them, pulling her cloak tight around herself. The needles above her head were thick enough to block some of the falling snow. She touched her temple gingerly, wincing at the tender lump forming there. The world kept tilting oddly when she moved her head too quickly. Amanda knew she should try to get up, to find Daisy and keep moving, but exhaustion and cold were seeping into her bones. "Please, Lord," she whispered through chattering teeth, "watch over Mama and help me find her." The prayer helped focus her thoughts, fighting against the fog that wanted to pull her under. She couldn't give up. Her mother needed her. The storm raged on, hour after endless hour. Snow built up around Amanda's shelter, slowly burying her cloak until she became just another drift against the fallen tree. She kept whispering prayers, trying to stay awake despite the dangerous warmth that began creeping through her frozen limbs. She knew that warmth was a lie, that letting herself sleep now might mean never waking up. "Our Father, who art in heaven?" Her voice grew fainter as the night deepened. The wind's howl became a lullaby, trying to sing her into that final sleep. Amanda fought against it, but her thoughts grew increasingly sluggish. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, or her hands tucked beneath her cloak. Time lost all meaning. The world narrowed to the small space beneath the pine boughs, to the endless fall of snow, to the struggle to keep her eyes open. Amanda thought she heard Daisy whinnying again, but it seemed to come from very far away. A flickering light caught her attention, warm and golden against the darkness. At first, she thought she was dreaming, or that her mind was playing tricks on her. But the light grew stronger, swaying slightly as if from a carried lantern. Amanda tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. A massive shadow moved between her and the light. Through half-frozen lashes, Amanda made out the shape of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, holding a storm lantern high as he surveyed the area. He moved with the silent grace of a hunter, his boots making almost no sound in the deep snow. The lantern's glow swept across Amanda's shelter. For a moment, she thought he would pass by, unable to distinguish her snow-covered form from the natural drifts. But the man paused, head cocked slightly as if listening. He moved closer, crouching down to peer beneath the pine boughs. Amanda tried to speak again, managing only a weak cough. The man's face was shadowed beneath a thick beard and wool hat, but his movements were gentle as he reached for her. Strong hands carefully brushed away the snow that had nearly buried her. "Hurt?" His voice was deep but soft, as if unused to speaking. Amanda managed a slight nod, immediately regretting the movement as pain lanced through her head. The man seemed to understand. He set the lantern down and reached into the hollow, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Amanda found herself cradled against a chest broad enough to block the wind, wrapped in the warmth of a heavy coat that smelled of wood smoke and pine. "Your horse is safe," the man said, anticipating her worried question. "Found her first. Led me to you." Amanda wanted to thank him, to ask where they were going, but the gentle swaying motion as he walked, combined with her exhaustion, was too much to resist. She drifted in and out of awareness, catching brief glimpses: snow-laden pine boughs overhead, the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the steady rhythm of the man's breathing. When next she opened her eyes, they were approaching a cabin she might have missed, if not for the warm light spilling from its single window. It was built into the lee of a massive rock overhang, the log walls and low roof nearly invisible against the stone behind it. A thin curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney, quickly torn away by the wind. The man shouldered open the heavy door, ducking slightly as he carried Amanda inside. The heat from a stone hearth struck her like a physical force, setting her frozen skin to tingling painfully. Through blurring vision, she made out rough-hewn furniture, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and pelts covering the walls. A small cry drew her attention, high-pitched and unmistakably that of an infant. Amanda tried to turn her head toward the sound, but the movement sent the room spinning again. The man laid her gently on a narrow bed near the fire, efficiently wrapping her in thick wool blankets. "Rest," he said simply, then moved to tend to the crying baby. Amanda caught glimpses of him through half-closed eyes as he crossed the cabin. The careful way he lifted the infant, his huge hands somehow gentle as he checked the child's wrappings, the low murmur of his voice as he soothed the baby's fussing. He returned to Amanda's side, carrying a cup of something steaming. Supporting her head carefully, he held the rim to her lips. "Drink," he instructed, slowly. The broth was rich and warm, sending life-giving heat through her frozen body. Amanda managed several sips before exhaustion overwhelmed her again. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard the man moving quietly around the cabin, the baby's cries softening to contented coos. Her last conscious thought was of her mother, still out there somewhere in the storm. But for now, there was nothing she could do except surrender to the warmth and safety of this strange shelter, and pray that morning would bring enough strength to continue her search. The mountain man's voice rumbled softly as he spoke to the infant, a low counterpoint to the storm's fury outside. Amanda let that deep voice anchor her as consciousness slipped away, knowing that somehow, against all odds, she had found help in the wilderness. Whether this silent rescuer would aid in her quest to find her mother remained to be seen. But for now, she was alive. And where there was life, there was hope. Morning crept into the cabin through narrow gaps in the wooden shutters, painting thin golden lines across Amanda's face. She blinked slowly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling of rough-hewn logs above her. The wool blankets covering her were warm and heavy, smelling faintly of wood smoke and pine needles. Her head still ached where she had struck it, but the dangerous fog of the night before had lifted. Carefully, Amanda turned her head toward the sound of crackling wood. The mountain man who had rescued her knelt before a stone hearth, feeding small sticks into a growing fire. His movements were deliberate and quiet, as if he was accustomed to moving silently even indoors. Near his feet sat a wooden box, lined with soft furs and fashioned into a makeshift cradle. A tiny infant lay sleeping there, her small fists curled beside her face. The sight made Amanda's heart clench. Such a small, vulnerable thing out here in the wilderness, so far from any town. The man must have sensed her watching, for he turned slightly, meeting her gaze. In the morning light, she could see him clearly for the first time. His beard was dark and neatly trimmed, not wild as she might have expected from a mountain recluse. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of long days in the sun, but those eyes themselves were kind, despite their watchfulness. "How's your head?" His voice was as quiet as his movements, pitched low to avoid disturbing the sleeping child. Amanda touched her temple, gingerly. "Better, thank you, though it still pains me when I move too quickly." He nodded, rising smoothly to his feet despite his large frame. "Likely a mild concussion. You'll need to rest today. Let it heal." "I cannot stay," Amanda protested, though even that small surge of emotion made her head throb. "My mother—" "First, introductions," he interrupted gently. "I'm Thorne Calder. You're safe here." "Amanda Whitley," she replied automatically, her mother's lessons in politeness holding even now. "And I'm grateful for your help, truly. But my mother was taken yesterday by Edgar Pike and his men. They left a false debt notice, claiming my father owed them for winter supplies. I have to find her." The change in Thorne's expression was subtle but immediate. His shoulders tensed, and something dark flickered behind his eyes at Pike's name. He turned away, busying himself with hanging a pot of water over the fire. But Amanda could see the tightness in his movements. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. Thorne was quiet for a long moment, measuring his words. "Yes, from years back. Pike's been working these mountains a long time, always just on the wrong side of the law." He paused, glancing at Amanda. "He's taken people before. Widows who can't pay their debts. Native families separated from their tribes. Settlers too isolated to call for help." Amanda's hands clenched in the blankets. "Taken them where? What does he do with them?" "Labor camps, mostly. Some to the railroads, some to mines. Anywhere desperate enough for workers that they don't ask questions about contracts." Thorne's voice was heavy with old anger. "He calls it debt collection, but it's nothing but slavery dressed in legal papers." "Dear God," Amanda whispered. The magnitude of the danger her mother was in crashed over her like ice water. She pushed herself upright, fighting against the wave of dizziness the movement caused. "I have to go. Now, please, just tell me which way his caravan was heading." "You cannot travel yet," Thorne said firmly. "Not with your head injury, and not in this weather." He gestured toward the shuttered window, where Amanda could hear the continued soft hiss of falling snow. "But my mother. We'll need you strong and clear-headed if you're to help her." Thorne moved to the fire, ladling steaming broth into a tin cup. "Pike's caravan moves slow in snow like this. They'll be taking the low pass toward Denver. That's where his contacts are." He brought the cup to Amanda, his expression softening slightly. "Drink. Build your strength. We can speak more once you've eaten." Amanda accepted the cup, recognizing the sense in his words, even as worry for her mother gnawed at her heart. The broth was rich with herbs and what tasted like rabbit meat. She sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through her. A small whimper drew her attention to the cradle box. The infant was stirring, tiny face scrunching up as she worked her way toward a proper cry. Before the sound could build, Thorn was there, lifting the baby with surprising gentleness for hands so large. "Shh, little one," he murmured, cradling her against his chest. The tenderness in his voice was unexpected, softening his usual quiet gravity. He reached for a bottle filled with what looked like milk, testing its temperature against his wrist before offering it to the hungry infant. Amanda watched, fascinated by the contradiction before her. This man who moved like a hunter and spoke of labor camps with such controlled anger was now swaying slightly, humming under his breath as he fed the tiny girl. The baby's small fingers curled against his rough shirt as she drank eagerly. "She's beautiful," Amanda said softly. "Is she?" She trailed off, unsure how to ask about the child's presence here. "Not mine," Thorn answered the unspoken question. "Her mother died in childbirth 2 weeks ago. Settler family passing through. Father couldn't care for a newborn alone, not on the trail with winter coming. Asked if I would look after her until spring, when he returns." His voice held a note of uncertainty, as if he still questioned the wisdom of his agreement. Amanda nodded, understanding better now his gentle capability with the infant. 2 weeks of caring for a newborn would teach anyone the necessary tenderness, no matter how rough their exterior. She watched as he shifted the baby to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. Outside, the snow continued its steady fall, building drifts against the cabin's walls. Amanda could hear the soft impacts on the roof, the occasional heavy thump of snow sliding off the rock overhang above. Much as she hated to admit it, Thorn was right. Trying to travel in these conditions would be foolish at best, fatal at worst. "How long?" she asked, gesturing toward the window. "How long until the storm passes?" Thorn considered, still patting the baby's back. "Hard to say. Mountain weather's unpredictable this time of year. Could clear by evening, could last days." He must have seen the flash of despair in her eyes, for he added, "But Pike's caravan will be slowed too. They won't risk their wagons on icy trails." Amanda set her empty cup aside, fighting against frustration and fear. "I cannot just sit here while my mother is in danger. There must be something we can do." "For now, you rest and heal," Thorn said firmly. "We can plan once your head is clearer." He settled the now drowsy infant back in her cradle, tucking the furs around her. "Sleep comes easy to little ones, at least," he murmured, almost to himself. Amanda watched him move about the cabin, adding wood to the fire, checking his stores, all while keeping one eye on the sleeping child. Despite her worry, despite the urgency burning in her chest, she found herself drawing comfort from the quiet domesticity of the scene. This strange, gentle giant of a man had saved her life, and now offered shelter from the storm. But as she settled, back against the pillows, her mother's face swam before her eyes. Alma Whitley was out there somewhere, probably cold and frightened, at the mercy of a man who traded in human lives. Amanda silently renewed her vow. As soon as the storm cleared, as soon as her head stopped spinning, she would find her mother and bring her home. And perhaps, she thought, glancing at Thorn's broad back as he worked, she would not have to do it alone. The snow fell steadily outside, blanketing the mountain in white silence. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly. The baby breathed her gentle sleep sounds, and Amanda felt her eyes growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert. Her last conscious thought was a prayer, for her mother's safety, for clear weather, and for guidance in the difficult days ahead. By mid-morning, The heavy snowfall had eased to scattered flurries. Pale winter sunlight filtered through breaks in the clouds, making the snow-covered landscape glitter. Amanda stood at the cabin's window, watching ice crystals dance in the cold mountain air. Her head still ached, but the dizziness had mostly subsided. "The weather's clearing," she said, turning to face Thorn. "We need to leave soon if we're going to catch up to Pike's caravan." Thorn looked up from where he was preparing the baby's milk, his expression cautious. "Your injury needs more time to heal." "My mother needs help now," Amanda insisted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Every hour we wait is another hour Pike has to get further away." She walked carefully to the table, steadying herself with one hand against the rough-hewn wood. "I'm stronger already, and I won't be alone this time." Thorn studied her face for a long moment, seeming to measure her determination against his concern. Finally, he nodded. "We'll need to prepare properly. No rushing blind into the snow this time." Relief flooded through Amanda. She sank onto the bench by the table, watching as Thorn tested the milk's temperature before feeding the infant. The baby's tiny hands curled around the bottle as she drank eagerly. "Will you tell me about her?" Amanda asked softly. "The truth of how she came to be in your care?" Thorn's shoulders tensed slightly. He remained silent as he finished feeding the baby, carefully wiping her small mouth with a soft cloth. Only after he had settled her back in the cradle did he speak, his voice low and heavy with memory. 2 months ago, I found her mother collapsed in the snow, not far from here. Sarah was her name. She was running from Pike's caravan, had been walking for days, sick with fever and heavy with child. He paused, absently straightening the blanket over the sleeping infant. "I brought her here, tried to help, but she was too weak. The birth came early. She lived just long enough to hold her daughter once." Amanda's heart ached at the sorrow in his voice. "What happened?" "Before she died, Sarah told me everything. Pike had taken her from her family's farm in Kansas, claiming her father's debts gave him the right to her labor. She wasn't the only one he'd collected that way." Thorn's jaw tightened. "She begged me to keep the baby safe, to never let Pike find her. She was afraid he'd claim the child too, sell her to some family wanting a baby girl." "Dear Lord," Amanda whispered, her hand rising to her throat. The depth of Pike's cruelty struck her anew. "So when you said the father would return in spring, a necessary story for any travelers who might pass through." Thorn met her eyes. "I couldn't risk Pike's men learning the truth." Amanda stood carefully and moved to the cradle, looking down at the peaceful infant. "What's her name?" "Hope," Thorn said softly. "Sarah named her Hope." The simple beauty of the name brought tears to Amanda's eyes. She reached down to touch the baby's soft cheek. "No wonder you were so quick to help me," she said. "You've seen firsthand what Pike is capable of. And now he has your mother." Thorn's voice hardened with resolve. "We'll need to move carefully. Pike travels with 2 railroad men these days, hired muscle to enforce his contracts." "Then we should start preparing," Amanda said. She straightened, pushing aside her sorrow to focus on action. "What supplies will we need?" Thorn nodded, apparently satisfied with her practical approach. "Let's check the trail conditions first. Then we can gather what's necessary." After ensuring Hope was sleeping soundly, they stepped outside. The cold air bit at Amanda's face as she followed Thorn through the knee-deep snow. He led her to a small rise overlooking the valley, where they could see the mountain trail winding below. "The snow's deep but settling," Thorn observed, testing the surface with his boot. "We'll need snowshoes, and the going will be slow, but it's passable." "How far behind them are we?" Amanda asked, squinting at the distant trail. 2 days, maybe 3 with the weather slowing them down. Thorne pointed north. Pike will take the low pass toward the railroad settlements. That's where he has contacts, men who don't ask questions about where their workers come from. They returned to the cabin, where Thorne immediately began gathering supplies. Amanda watched as he pulled snowshoes from the rafters, checked their bindings, and laid them near the door. He added blankets, rope, and packages of dried meat to a growing pile of necessities. "I can help," Amanda said, moving toward the herb shelf. "These plants, I recognize them. My mother taught me their uses." She began carefully grinding dried leaves for the baby's tea, the familiar work helping to settle her anxious thoughts. The afternoon passed in quiet preparation. Thorne checked and rechecked their supplies, while Amanda prepared herbs and helped where she could. Hope woke twice for feeding, and Amanda observed how naturally Thorne cared for her, his large hands gentle as he changed and swaddled the infant. As evening approached, Thorne prepared a simple stew of dried meat and preserved vegetables. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in thought. The cabin was warm, filled with the homey sense of cooking and wood smoke, but Amanda couldn't forget why they were preparing to leave it. "Tell me about the railroad men," she said finally, setting aside her empty bowl. "What should we expect?" Thorne's expression grew serious. "They're hired guns, paid to protect Pike's interests. Not skilled fighters, but dangerous enough with rifles. They'll be watching for pursuit. Pike's made enemies before." Amanda nodded, absorbing this information. "We'll need to be careful then. Smart." "Yes." Thorne glanced at the sleeping baby. "And there's Hope to consider. I can't leave her here alone, but taking her with us?" "We'll manage," Amanda said firmly. "Together." She reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "Thank you, Mr. Calder, for trusting me with the truth about Hope, and for helping me find my mother." Thorne's face softened slightly. "Thorne," he corrected. "Just Thorne." Amanda smiled, then bowed her head in silent prayer. She asked for protection, for her mother, for Hope, for themselves, for guidance in the difficult journey ahead. When she looked up, she found Thorne watching her with quiet understanding. Outside, the mountain night was settling in, stars appearing in breaks between the clouds. The snow had stopped entirely now, leaving a pristine white blanket over the landscape. Tomorrow they would leave this sanctuary, venturing out to face Pike and his men. But tonight, in this warm cabin with Hope's soft breathing providing gentle counterpoint to the crackling fire, Amanda felt a spark of real hope. They had a purpose, a plan, and most importantly, they had each other. Thorne rose to add wood to the fire, his movements careful and quiet so as not to wake the baby. Amanda watched him, understanding now the weight of responsibility he carried. He wasn't just a mountain recluse who had taken in a motherless child. He was Hope's protector, keeping her safe from the same man who now held Amanda's mother captive. Their shared enemy had unknowingly forged a bond between them, creating a partnership born of necessity and trust. Whatever challenges lay ahead on the snow-covered trails, they would face them together, for Hope, for Amanda's mother, and for all those Pike had wronged. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in soft pink and gold. Amanda woke to the sound of leather creaking and hooves shuffling in the packed snow outside. She blinked away sleep, immediately alert as the previous day's events rushed back into focus. Through the cabin's frosted window, she could see Thorne already at work. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking saddle straps and securing their supplies. The infant, Hope, was nestled against his broad chest in a carefully fashioned sling, sleeping peacefully despite the morning chill. Amanda dressed quickly, pulling on the warm clothes Thorn had laid out the night before. Thick wool socks, sturdy boots, and multiple layers that would protect against the bitter mountain cold. Her head still ached faintly where she'd struck it during her fall, but the dizziness had passed. The cabin's main room held the lingering warmth of the banked fire. Amanda stirred the coals and added kindling, bringing the flames back to life. On the table she found a plate of cornbread and a steaming cup of coffee waiting. Her heart warmed at this simple evidence of Thorn's thoughtfulness. "Eat," Thorn said from the doorway, his voice low. "We have a long day ahead." Amanda nodded, knowing every minute counted, but also understanding the wisdom in starting their journey well fortified. She ate quickly but thoroughly, savoring the simple breakfast. The cornbread was dense and filling, still warm from where Thorn had kept it near the fire. "The horses are ready," Thorn reported as she finished her coffee. "Pike's caravan has at least a 2-day head start, but this weather will slow them down. We might make up some time if we're careful." Amanda wrapped her mother's old shawl around her shoulders, tucking it securely beneath her heavy coat. The familiar wool carried memories of home, strengthening her resolve. "Then let's not waste any more daylight." Outside, their breath clouded in the frigid air. 2 horses stood ready, Thorn's sturdy mountain gelding and a fresh mount to replace Amanda's exhausted mare. Snowshoes were tied to the saddles, and their supplies had been carefully distributed between the 2 animals. "The baby?" Amanda asked, noting how peacefully Hope slept against Thorn's chest. "She's well bundled," he assured her, patting the sling gently. "I've traveled with her like this before. She seems to sleep better with the motion." They mounted carefully, Amanda taking a moment to adjust to the unfamiliar horse. The snow lay deep across the landscape, pristine except for the trail they would follow. Thorn led the way, guiding them down from his sheltered cabin site toward the main trail where Pike's wagon had passed. The going was slow at first. The horses picked their way carefully through the drifts, and Amanda found herself studying the snow ahead intently. Every mark could be significant, a sign of their quarry's passage. "There," she said after they'd been riding for about an hour. She pointed to where a fir branch hung broken, its dark needles standing out against the white landscape. "That's fresh damage." Thorn nodded approvingly. "Good eye. The wagon would have caught it passing through. See how the brake is clean, not weathered?" They continued on, Amanda growing more confident in reading the signs of passage. A scrap of cloth, faded blue and coarse, caught on a thorny bush. She dismounted carefully to retrieve it, recognizing the fabric as similar to her mother's everyday dress. "Mother must have left this, deliberately," she said, tucking the scrap into her pocket. "She'd want us to know we're on the right trail." "Your mother sounds like a clever woman," Thorn observed, adjusting Hope's sling as the baby stirred briefly before settling back to sleep. "She is," Amanda replied, her voice tight with emotion. "She taught me everything I know about healing herbs and reading weather signs. She's strong, but Pike..." She trailed off, worried about what her mother might be enduring. "We'll find her," Thorn assured her, his tone carrying absolute conviction. "Pike may be cruel, but he's also cautious. He won't risk damaging what he considers his property." They pressed on through the morning, the trail gradually climbing higher into the mountains. The wagon tracks, though partially filled by fresh snow, remained visible enough to follow. Around midday, they came upon a natural shelter formed by an overhanging rock wall. "We'll rest the horses here," Thorn decided, surveying the protected space. "Give them a chance to catch their breath in this thin air." They dismounted, and Amanda immediately moved to help with Hope, who had begun to fuss. She took the infant while Thorn tended to the horses, warming the baby's tiny hands between her own. "Sweet girl," she murmured, rocking gently. You're being so brave for us." Thorn disappeared briefly to check the ridge above their resting place, making sure they weren't being observed. When he returned, he shared some dried meat and hard cheese with Amanda, both of them eating quickly but staying alert. As they continued their journey that afternoon, the trail narrowed considerably, forcing them to ride single file. The silence of the mountain was broken only by the crunch of snow beneath hooves and the occasional cry of a distant bird. "How did you come to live up here alone?" Amanda asked during a relatively easy stretch of trail, curious about the quiet man who had so readily come to her aid. Thorn was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I trapped these mountains for years, saw too many people taking what wasn't theirs, from the land, from each other. Seemed easier to keep to myself." He adjusted Hope's sling again. "Until it wasn't." "Until Sarah needed help," Amanda supplied softly. "Until Sarah," he agreed. "Makes a man question his choices, finding a pregnant woman half dead in the snow. Makes him wonder if staying apart from others is really the right path." They discussed frontier justice as they rode, speaking of the choices people make when pushed by hardship. Amanda shared stories of neighbors helping neighbors through tough winters, while Thorn spoke of the darkness he'd witnessed, men like Pike who preyed on the vulnerable. Late afternoon light was slanting through the trees when they came upon signs of a recent camp. A fire pit, the ashes still holding warmth, lay in a sheltered hollow. Thorn dismounted to examine the site more closely. "Pike's boots," he said, pointing to distinctive tracks in the snow. "They can't be more than half a day ahead now." Amanda's heart leaped at this news, but Thorn held up a cautionary hand. "We'll camp here tonight. It's not safe to travel these trails after dark, and the horses need real rest." Though eager to press on, Amanda knew he was right. They set about making camp with practiced efficiency. Thorn constructed a lean-to from pine boughs, while Amanda gathered dry wood for a small, well-shielded fire. The horses were tended to, fed, and secured for the night. As darkness settled over the mountain, they huddled in the relative warmth of their shelter. Hope, awake now and fed, lay contentedly in Amanda's arms while Thorn kept watch. Amanda found herself humming softly, an old hymn her mother had often sung during long winter evenings at home. The baby's eyes grew heavy as Amanda hummed, tiny fingers curling around one of Amanda's own. She looked up to find Thorn watching them, his usually stern expression softened by something that might have been tenderness. "She likes you," he said simply. "Babies know who they can trust," Amanda replied, remembering her mother's words from long ago. "Just like horses and dogs." Thorn nodded, turning his attention back to the darkness beyond their shelter. But something had shifted between them, a deepening of the partnership that had begun in his cabin. They were no longer simply two people thrown together by circumstance. They were a team, united in their mission to rescue her mother and protect this innocent child from Pike's cruel grasp. The night settled around them, cold and clear. Stars emerged above the towering pines, their light reflecting off the snow. Amanda continued humming softly, her voice carrying peaceful melodies into the mountain darkness, while Thorn kept his vigilant watch. Hope slept soundly between them, safe and warm, as they rested for the challenges that tomorrow would surely bring. Dawn crept over the ridge, bringing with it a thick blanket of ice fog that clung to the mountainside like a ghostly shroud. Amanda shivered as she helped Thorn break camp, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The infant stirred against Thorn's chest, making soft sounds of protest at the early morning chill. "The fog will give us cover," Thorn said quietly, securing their supplies. "But it'll make tracking harder. We'll need to stay close to the wagon trail." Amanda nodded, pulling her wool scarf tighter. The tracks they'd been following were still visible, though partially obscured by a light dusting of overnight snow. They led downward, toward the valley where railroad crews often made their winter camps. They mounted their horses with practiced care, Thorn adjusting Hope's sling one final time before settling into his saddle. The descent was treacherous in the fog, forcing them to move slowly. Ice-coated branches reached out like skeletal fingers from the mist, and their horses' hooves made hollow sounds against the frozen ground. Around midday, as they picked their way down a particularly steep section of trail, Hope began to fuss more insistently than usual. Amanda noticed Thorn's frown deepening as he tried to comfort the child. "Let me check her," Amanda said, drawing her horse alongside his when they reached a wider section of path. Thorn carefully passed the baby to her, and Amanda's heart sank as she felt the slight but unmistakable warmth radiating from the infant's forehead. "She's running a fever," Amanda said, her voice tight with concern. She pressed her lips gently to Hope's forehead, an old method her mother had taught her for gauging temperature. "It's not high yet, but it's there." Worry creased Thorn's weathered face. "Could be just from the travel," he said, though his tone betrayed his uncertainty. "The cold, the altitude changes." "Perhaps," Amanda agreed, though she shared his concern. She wrapped Hope more securely before returning her to Thorn's care. "We should watch her closely." They continued their descent, the fog gradually thinning as they lost elevation. The valley floor began to take shape below them, scattered patches of dark pine breaking up the expanses of white. Amanda's attention was divided between watching for signs of Pike's camp and monitoring Hope's increasing restlessness. Near mid-afternoon, Thorn raised his hand in a signal to stop. Ahead of them, the snow told a story of recent activity. Flattened areas where tents had stood, scattered horse droppings, and broken crates half buried in the snow. Amanda's pulse quickened as she spotted fresh smoke rising through the trees perhaps a quarter-mile ahead. "There," Thorn whispered, pointing to a sheltered hollow where several wagons were visible through the sparse winter foliage. "We need to get closer, but carefully." They dismounted, securing their horses in a thick stand of pines. Thorn adjusted Hope's sling so the baby was completely hidden beneath his heavy coat, then led Amanda in a wide arc that would bring them closer to the camp while staying out of sight. Moving from cover to cover, they worked their way to a dense patch of brush that offered a clear view of the encampment. Amanda's heart leaped when she spotted her mother near one of the wagon fires. Alma's wrists were loosely bound with rope, but she appeared unharmed, wrapped in her familiar blue shawl as she stirred something in a cooking pot. Pike stood near the center of the camp, engaged in animated conversation with two men Amanda didn't recognize. They wore heavy winter coats with brass railroad company badges pinned prominently to their lapels. Their rifles rested casually against a nearby wagon wheel. Casual, but within easy reach. "Railroad enforcers," Thorn breathed, barely audible. "Pike's getting desperate if he's dealing with them directly." The wind shifted, carrying fragments of conversation to their hiding place. "Guaranteed labor contracts," Pike was saying, his tone wheedling. "Just need a few more days to—" One of the enforcers cut him off sharply. "We need that ledger by week's end, Pike. Company's tired of waiting." "The agreements are all there, every name, every term," Pike assured them, spreading his hands in a placating gesture. "Worth far more than what you've already paid." Amanda felt sick, realizing how many others might have suffered her mother's fate. She started to rise, but Thorn's hand on her arm held her in place. "We can't," he whispered, nodding toward Hope, who had begun to stir restlessly again. "Not with the baby sick. Not with those rifles. We need patience." Amanda wanted to argue, but she could feel the heat radiating from the infant even through Thorne's coat. They couldn't risk a confrontation with a sick child, not against armed men. Still, watching her mother's solitary figure by the fire made her heart ache fiercely. "Your mother's alive and relatively well," Thorne reminded her gently. "Pike needs his workers healthy. We'll find a way, but we need to be smart about it." With great reluctance, Amanda allowed him to lead her back toward their horses. They traveled perhaps half a mile before finding a suitable place to make camp, a hollow beneath a rocky overhang, well hidden from the trail, but with a clear escape route if needed. As Thorne constructed a shelter that would block their fire from view, Amanda examined Hope more thoroughly. The baby's fever had definitely risen, her small face flushed and hot to the touch. She was becoming increasingly fretful, refusing to nurse from the bottle of goat's milk they carried. "Her breathing's faster than it should be," Amanda said, worry evident in her voice. She had helped her mother tend enough sick children to recognize the signs of a developing illness. "We need to get her fever down." Thorne knelt beside them, his face grave as he watched Hope squirm uncomfortably in Amanda's arms. "What do you need?" "Willow bark for the fever," Amanda said, mentally cataloging the herbs she'd brought. "And I saw some wild mint growing near that last stream crossing. That might help ease her breathing. But first we need to cool her down." She showed Thorne how to bathe Hope's flushed face and neck with snow-cooled cloths while she prepared the herbal remedies. The baby whimpered at the cold touch, but didn't fight them. "Shh, little one," Amanda soothed, mixing willow bark tea with the smallest amount of honey to make it palatable. "You're going to be just fine." As she worked, her mind raced through possible plans. They needed to rescue her mother, but they couldn't leave Hope, and they couldn't risk taking a sick infant into a confrontation. The railroad enforcers complicated everything. They weren't just dealing with Pike's usual hired muscle now. "Those men," she said quietly, carefully feeding small spoonfuls of tea to Hope. "What do they want with Pike's ledger?" Thorne's expression darkened. "Railroad. Companies use contract labor to build their lines. But some contracts—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Some aren't exactly voluntary. Pike's been supplying them with workers, people in debt, widows with no options, anyone vulnerable enough to be forced into signing." "Like my mother," Amanda said bitterly. "Like your mother," Thorne agreed. "But Pike's gotten greedy. Must have promised them more workers than he could deliver. Now they want proof he can fulfill his contracts." Hope finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her breathing still too rapid but slightly less labored. Amanda held her close, feeling the heat of her fever through the blankets. "We'll need to keep checking her temperature through the night," she said, "and we should gather more mint while there's still light. We may need it if her breathing gets worse." Thorne nodded, rising to his feet. "I'll get the mint. You stay with her. But Amanda—" He paused, looking back at her with grave eyes. "We may need to accept that we can't do this alone. Not with a sick baby and armed men in play." Amanda knew he was right, but the thought of waiting while her mother remained Pike's prisoner made her chest tight with anxiety. She looked down at Hope's flushed face, then back up at Thorne. "We'll find a way," she said firmly. "God didn't lead us this far to abandon us now." Thorne's expression softened slightly. "No," he agreed quietly. "I don't suppose he did." As he disappeared into the gathering dusk to gather herbs, Amanda cradled Hope close, humming softly to soothe the baby's restless stirring. Somewhere in the valley below, her mother was enduring her captivity with characteristic quiet strength. Amanda silently renewed her vow. She would find a way to save both her mother and this innocent child, no matter what it took. The sound of Thorne's careful movements as he gathered mint leaves mingled with the evening wind through the pines. Hope slept fitfully in her arms, her small body radiating worrying heat. Amanda dipped another cloth in cold water, continuing her vigil as the mountain darkness deepened around their hidden camp. The mountain evening settled around their hidden camp like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a deeper chill that made Amanda pull her coat tighter. She cradled Hope closer to her chest, worry creasing her brow as the infant's weak cries continued despite their best efforts to soothe her. Thorn worked methodically, weaving thick fir branches into a makeshift shelter that would block the worst of the wind while hiding any trace of their small fire from the valley below. His movements were practiced and efficient, speaking of years spent surviving in these harsh conditions. Every few minutes, he glanced their way, his expression growing more concerned as Hope's distressed sounds continued. "The shelter's nearly done," he said, securing another branch. "We'll get you both out of this wind soon." Amanda nodded gratefully, continuing to rock, the feverish child. Hope's skin burned against her palm, and her usually bright eyes were glassy with illness. Drawing from years of watching her mother tend to sick children in their community, Amanda knew they needed to act quickly to bring the fever down. "Could you fetch water from that stream we passed?" she asked Thorn. "I need to prepare some herbs." He immediately set aside his work and retrieved their water skin, disappearing into the gathering darkness. While he was gone, Amanda carefully sorted through her collection of dried herbs, selecting thyme for its healing properties and willow bark to fight the fever. Her mother had taught her well about nature's remedies, lessons that now seemed more precious than ever. Thorn returned swiftly with the water, his footsteps nearly silent despite his size. Amanda directed him to heat some of it in their small trail pot over the carefully shielded fire. As steam began to rise, she added the herbs, letting their healing properties infuse the water. "Hold her up a bit," Amanda instructed, positioning the steaming pot carefully. "The vapor should help ease her breathing." Thorn gently supported Hope's tiny body, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he adjusted her position. The baby's cries had weakened to whimpers, which worried Amanda even more. She monitored the rise and fall of Hope's chest, noting how each breath seemed to require more effort than it should. Thorn's eyes went to the darkening sky, where heavy clouds were gathering. "Temperature's dropping," he observed grimly. "Cold air won't help her breathing any." Amanda fought down a surge of fear, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. She began to sing softly, a lullaby her mother had sung countless times during long winter nights when Amanda herself had been ill. "Hush now, little dove, rest your weary wings, angels watch above, while mother sweetly sings." The familiar melody seemed to soothe Hope somewhat, her restless movements calming slightly. Amanda continued singing, her voice carrying memories of comfort and safety. She noticed Thorn watching her, an unexpected softness in his usually guarded expression. "Your mother taught you that song?" he asked quietly when she finished. Amanda nodded, adjusting Hope's blankets. "She sang it to me whenever I was sick or scared, said her mother taught it to her, and her mother before that." She smiled sadly, thinking of Alma alone in Pike's camp. "She always said songs carry healing in their own way." Thorn added another small branch to their fire, keeping it low but steady. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Amanda agreed firmly, emphasizing the present tense. "And we're going to get her back." A comfortable silence fell between them as they tended to Hope, but Amanda could sense Thorn had something weighing on his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with reluctance. "There's something you should know about Pike's ledger," he began, checking once more that their fire remained hidden. "About why I've been avoiding settlements lately." Amanda looked up, reading the tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" Thorn's hands stilled on the firewood. Pike has my name in that book. A contract I never signed, but he made it look legal enough. Claims I agreed to guide railroad crews through Ute territory, showing them passes that the tribes want kept secret. He met her eyes directly. If those railroad men get that ledger, they'll have what looks like proof that I betrayed both the company and the Ute people who've trusted me. Amanda absorbed this revelation, understanding better now why Thorne had chosen such an isolated life. But you didn't sign anything? No, he said firmly. Refused to help Pike exploit the land or the people who belong to it, but he's clever with forgeries, and the railroad company's eager to believe anyone who promises them easier routes. He looked down at Hope, sleeping fitfully in Amanda's arms. If Pike realizes I have the baby, he might try to use her to bargain. My silence about his schemes in exchange for her safety. Amanda reached out impulsively, laying her free hand on his arm. We won't let that happen, she assured him. The truth has a way of coming to light, especially when good people stand together against wrong. Thorne's expression softened slightly at her touch, but worry still lined his face. I wish I had your faith in justice. It's not just faith in justice, Amanda said quietly, remembering her mother's teachings. It's faith in God's ability to make things right, even when the path seems impossible. Hope stirred then, her weak cry drawing their immediate attention. Amanda felt her forehead, still too warm, but perhaps slightly less burning than before. She prepared another batch of herbal steam while Thorne adjusted their shelter, strengthening it against the increasing wind. Light snow began to fall as the night deepened, the flakes drifting through the fir branches like falling stars. The cooling air seemed to ease Hope's fever somewhat, though her breathing remained labored. Amanda and Thorne took turns holding her through the night, one always watching while the other caught brief moments of rest. During her watch, Amanda studied Thorne's sleeping face, noting how the worry lines smoothed away in repose. She found herself wondering about the path that had led him to this solitary life in the mountains, and what kind of man would choose to take in an orphaned infant rather than look the other way. There was a gentleness in him that belied his rough exterior, showing most clearly in the tender way he handled Hope. The baby stirred against her chest, and Amanda resumed her quiet singing, the old lullaby carrying through the night like a prayer. Snow continued to fall softly around their shelter, and somewhere in the valley below, she knew her mother would be drawing strength from the same faith that had carried their family through so many trials. We'll find a way, she whispered to the sleeping child, for all of us. Thorne's eyes opened at her voice, alert despite his brief rest. He moved to check Hope's temperature with the back of his hand, his touch gentle as always. The snow's helping cool her a bit, he observed, relief evident in his tone. But we'll need to decide soon. Stay here until she's stronger, or risk moving closer to Pike's camp? Amanda looked down at Hope's flushed face. Let's see how she is by morning, she suggested. Maybe the herbs will help more by then. Thorne nodded agreement, adding a few small branches to their fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the shelter walls as they settled in to wait out the long night, their shared concern for Hope creating a warm current of understanding between them, despite the cold mountain air. The snow fell steadily now, adding another layer of silence to the wilderness around them. In their sheltered camp, Amanda and Thorne continued their vigil, united in their determination to protect both the vulnerable child in their care and the innocent people threatened by Pike's schemes. Though the challenges ahead seemed daunting, Amanda felt a quiet strength in their unlikely partnership. A former mountain recluse and a homesteader's daughter, brought together by circumstance but bound now by something deeper than mere necessity. Hope slept fitfully in her arms as the night wore on, each breath a reminder of the urgent choices they would face with the coming dawn. But for now, In their hidden camp beneath the snow-laden fir branches, they found a moment of peace in their shared purpose and the simple act of caring for a sick child together. Dawn crept over the mountain ridge in pale fingers of light, touching the snow-laden branches of their shelter. Amanda blinked away exhaustion, her arms stiff from holding Hope through the long night. The baby's breathing had steadied somewhat, each little puff of air visible in the cold morning light. Thorn was already awake, carefully stoking their small fire to warm a pot of broth. His movements were precise and quiet, testament to years of living in the wilderness where sound carried far. He glanced at Amanda, his eyes showing the same weariness she felt, but also relief. "How is she?" he whispered, moving closer to check Hope's temperature. Amanda shifted the sleeping infant carefully. "The fever's down some. That cold night might have helped after all." She touched Hope's forehead with the back of her hand. "Still warm, but not burning like before." Thorn nodded, returning to the fire to stir the broth. The familiar scent of herbs and dried meat filled their shelter, reminding Amanda how long it had been since they'd eaten properly. Her worry for her mother and the baby had pushed aside all thought of hunger. "We should try to feed her while she's calm," Thorn said, carefully pouring some broth into a tin cup to cool. "She'll need strength for what's coming." Amanda accepted the cup, testing its temperature before attempting to dribble a few drops between Hope's tiny lips. The baby stirred, accepting the broth with small swallows. "That's it, little one," Amanda murmured encouragingly. As Hope drank, Thorn settled beside them, his expression thoughtful. "We need to talk about tonight," he said quietly. "About how we're going to get your mother out of there." Amanda looked up, meeting his serious gaze. "You have a plan?" "The beginnings of one." Thorn pulled out a stick and began sketching in the dirt near the fire. "From what we saw yesterday, Pike's camp has a standard layout. 2 guards rotating watches, probably 4-hour shifts if they're following railroad protocols." He marked positions with X's in the dirt. "Pike himself stays near the central fire, keeps his horses close. He's always been particular about his animals." Amanda leaned forward, studying the rough map. "And my mother?" Thorn pointed to a spot near one of the wagons. "Supply wagon, where we saw her yesterday. It's actually the best position for what we need to do, far enough from the guard posts, close to the tree line." "We'll need to wait for dark," Amanda said, thinking it through. "When the guards are tired, less alert." Thorn nodded approval. "First dark is best. That's when attention wanders before they fully adjust to night watch. The moon will be thin, but there's enough snow to see by." Amanda shifted Hope to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. "I should go in first," she said firmly. "To my mother." Thorn's expression tightened with concern. "Amanda." "Listen," she interrupted softly. "If Mama sees me first, she won't cry out or make any sudden moves. She'll understand we're there to help. But if she sees a stranger approaching in the dark..." She let the implications hang in the air. Thorn was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he gave a reluctant nod. "You're right, but I'll be right behind you, close enough to help if anything goes wrong." "Agreed." Amanda reached for the cup of broth again as Hope began to fuss. "We'll need to be ready for Pike to notice something's wrong. He's not the type to let anyone slip away easily." "No," Thorn agreed grimly. "He isn't. But he's also not used to people standing up to him. Bullies rarely are." He added more wood to their small fire. "We'll need to rest today, save our strength, and there's work to be done before we move." They spent the morning in quiet preparation. Thorn checked and adjusted their horses' tack, making sure nothing would creak or jingle at the wrong moment. Amanda wrapped strips of wool around their boot soles for better grip and silence in the snow, a trick her father had taught her years ago. Hope slept more peacefully as the day warmed, her fever continuing to ease. They took turns holding her while the other worked, sharing the responsibility that had somehow become natural to them both. Amanda found herself watching, Thorn with the baby, noting how his hard expression softened whenever Hope gripped his finger or made small sounds in her sleep. By midday, they had their gear sorted and ready, only what they could carry quietly, nothing that might slow their escape. Amanda sat cross-legged in their shelter, Hope sleeping soundly in her lap, while she checked her mother's herb pouches one last time. The familiar scents of dried thyme and willow bark brought tears to her eyes as she thought of Alma working at her sewing just days ago before Pike arrived. "We'll have her back soon," Thorn said quietly, noting her expression. He was repairing a loose strap on one of the saddles, his big hands surprisingly deft with the small leather-working tools. Amanda nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "I know. I just hate thinking of her there, wondering if anyone's coming for her." She stroked Hope's fine hair. "At least she's strong. Mama's always been stronger than people guess." "Like her daughter," Thorn observed, the ghost of a smile touching his features. The afternoon passed slowly as they rested and prepared. They spoke little, each lost in thoughts of what the night might bring. The baby woke occasionally for feeding and changing, but seemed content to sleep most of the day, as if sensing the need for quiet. As evening approached, the tension in their small camp grew more noticeable. Amanda checked their wrapped boots one final time, while Thorn carefully extinguished their fire, spreading snow over the ashes until no trace remained. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, tiny points of light breaking through the winter clouds. "Ready?" Thorn asked softly, securing Hope in her sling across his chest. They had decided he should carry her during the approach. His experience moving silently through snow would be crucial if the baby stirred at the wrong moment. Amanda took a deep breath, touching the small cross she wore at her throat, her mother's gift on her 16th birthday. "Ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of fear in her stomach. They moved out of their shelter into the gathering dusk, leaving no trace of their presence behind. The snow had a thin crust of ice that barely crunched beneath their wrapped boots. Amanda led the way, having memorized the path down to Pike's camp during their observations the day before. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night fell, their breath forming small clouds in the air. Hope remained mercifully quiet, lulled by the warmth of Thorn's body and the gentle motion of his careful steps. Amanda found herself holding her own breath at times, straining to listen for any sound from the camp below. They paused at the edge of the tree line, waiting as full dark settled over the valley. Amanda could make out the glow of Pike's central fire and the darker shapes of wagons beyond it. Two smaller fires marked the guard posts, just as Thorn had predicted. They watched as one guard made a slow circuit of the camp's perimeter, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Amanda felt Thorn's presence close behind her, solid and reassuring. She turned to look at him, barely able to make out his features in the darkness. He nodded once, answering her unspoken question. It was time. They began their careful approach, using the shadows cast by the wagons as cover. Amanda's heart pounded so hard she feared others might hear it, but her steps remained sure and silent. Every sense was heightened: the crackle of the distant fires, the stamp of a horse's hoof, the subtle shifting of snow beneath their feet. The supply wagon loomed ahead, its dark bulk a promise of reunion and danger both. Amanda paused, letting her eyes adjust further, searching for movement near the wagon's wheels. There, a darker shape huddled against the wooden side. Her mother's familiar shawl was just visible in the faint starlight. Amanda squeezed Thorne's arm once, their agreed-upon signal, and began her final approach. Each step felt like an eternity, the distance both too far and too close. She could hear her mother's quiet breathing now, and something in her chest tightened with love and worry. Behind her, Thorne melted into the shadows with hope, close enough to help but hidden from immediate sight. Amanda took one more step forward, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached out toward her mother's shoulder. "Mama," she breathed, so softly it was barely a sound at all. "Mama, it's Amanda. Don't make a sound." Alma Whitley went very still, but did not cry out. Slowly she turned her head, her eyes wide in the darkness as they found her daughter's face. The night pressed close around them, full of stars and danger and hope, as mother and daughter reached for each other's hands in the darkness. The night settled over the valley like a heavy blanket, bringing with it both darkness and bitter cold. Amanda and Thorne moved with careful precision through the deepening shadows, their wrapped boots making no sound in the crusty snow. They kept to the tree line, studying the layout of Pike's camp from multiple angles before beginning their approach. 2 railroad enforcers hunched near the main fire, passing a bottle between them. Their rifles lay propped against a nearby log, within arm's reach but not in hand. The men's voices carried softly on the winter air, growing looser with each drink they shared. Amanda watched them carefully, noting how their shoulders gradually relaxed, how their attention drifted more to their conversation than their surroundings. Thorne touched her elbow, gesturing toward the supply wagon. There, partly sheltered by canvas, Amanda could make out her mother's familiar form. Alma lay curled on her side, apparently sleeping, with ropes binding her wrists in what looked like a token restraint. Even from this distance, Amanda could see the bindings were loose enough to allow some movement, Pike's arrogance showing in his certainty that a widow wouldn't try to escape. They circled the camp's perimeter, staying low and using the wagons for cover. Hope remained blessedly quiet in her sling against Thorne's chest, perhaps sensing the tension in his careful movements. When they reached the shadow of the supply wagon, Amanda paused, letting her eyes adjust fully to the darkness. "Mama," she whispered, barely louder than a breath. "Mama, wake up." Alma stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion showed on her face, then recognition dawned, and tears welled up immediately. She started to speak, but Amanda pressed a finger to her own lips, warning for silence. Her mother nodded, understanding. Amanda crept closer, her heart aching at the sight of rope marks on her mother's wrists. "We're going to get you out of here," she breathed, leaning near enough that only Alma could hear. "Just stay calm and be ready to move when I say." Thorne's boots scraped softly against the wagon wheel, their agreed-upon warning signal. He'd heard something. Amanda froze, listening intently. The sound of horses shifting in their picket line carried from the other side of camp, along with the crunch of footsteps in snow. Before Amanda could retreat to deeper shadow, a lantern flared to life behind the wagon. Its sudden glow caught her in its circle, and Pike's voice rang out harsh and triumphant. "Well, well, what have we here?" "Guards," Pike shouted, his free hand already reaching for Amanda. "We've got ourselves an intruder." Amanda tried to duck away, but Pike's fingers closed around her wrists like iron bands. He yanked her arms behind her back, making her gasp with pain as he bound them tightly with a length of rope from his belt. The knots were nothing like the loose bindings he'd used on her mother. These bit deep into her skin. "Let her go!" Alma cried out, struggling to sit up. "She's done nothing wrong." Pike laughed, the sound ugly in the quiet night. "Nothing wrong? Trespassing? Attempting to interfere with legal contracts? I'd say that's plenty wrong." He gave the ropes another cruel twist. "But don't worry, I'm a reasonable businessman. We'll just add her to the account." The railroad men had roused themselves by now, rifles in hand as they approached. Amanda could smell the whiskey on their breath as they drew near. She tried to catch a glimpse of where Thorn had been, but saw only darkness beyond the lantern's reach. She silently thanked God that he remained hidden, protecting the baby. "In fact," Pike continued, clearly enjoying himself, "I know something else that belongs in my ledger." He raised his voice, speaking to the shadows. "That baby you're hiding out there, the one that should have been mine by right when its mother died in my employ, don't think I haven't heard rumors these past months." Amanda's blood ran cold. She hadn't expected Pike to know about Hope. "There's no baby," she said quickly, trying to draw his attention back to her. "I came alone." "Did you now?" Pike's grip tightened painfully on her arm. "Then you won't mind if my men search the area thoroughly. That infant represents a significant investment. Young ones fetch a fine price from certain parties up north." Horror rose in Amanda's throat at his casual cruelty. She struggled against the ropes, earning another harsh twist that made her wince. "You're a monster," she spat. "I'm a businessman," Pike corrected, starting to drag her toward his personal wagon. "And now I have 2 more assets to add to my holdings." He called to the guards. "Search the trees. Bring me anyone you find. And that baby." Amanda tried to plant her feet, to resist being pulled away from her mother, but Pike's strength was too much. She looked desperately toward the shadows where she knew Thorn must be watching, trying to warn him with her eyes to stay hidden, to protect Hope at all costs. "Don't hurt her," Alma pleaded, pulling against her own bonds. "Please, I'll work harder. I'll do whatever you ask." Pike ignored the widow's cries, forcing Amanda to stumble forward through the snow. "Touching reunion," he sneered. "But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time together once we reach the railroad camp. I hear they're always looking for strong young women to cook for the crews." Amanda's mind raced, trying to think of a way to alert Thorn without revealing his position. "There are people who know where I am," she said loudly. "People who won't stop looking." "Let them look." Pike shoved her roughly against his wagon wheel. "By tomorrow we'll be well away from here, and soon enough you'll be signed over to the railroad's care, legal and proper-like." He smiled coldly. "Just like your mother." The railroad men had split up, moving in widening circles from the camp with their rifles ready. Amanda watched them anxiously, knowing Thorn was too skilled to be caught easily, but also knowing he wouldn't leave her and Alma behind. She could almost feel his struggle, hidden somewhere in the darkness, forced to choose between protecting Hope and helping them. Pike began securing her to the wagon wheel with another length of rope, this time binding her ankles as well. "Get comfortable," he advised mockingly. "We move out at first light." He raised his voice again, calling to the shadows. "You hear that, stranger? Your time's running out. Show yourself now, bring me what's mine, and maybe we can work out an arrangement that doesn't end with everyone suffering." Amanda bit her lip to keep from crying out a warning. She could only pray that Thorn would stay hidden, would keep Hope safe from this man who saw people as nothing more than entries in his ledger. The night pressed close around them, full of terrible possibilities, as she heard the guards continuing their search in the darkness beyond the lantern's reach. Pike stood over her, lantern held high, studying her face with cold satisfaction. "Your father was a fool," he said conversationally. "Thinking he could homestead up here without my help. Should have taken my first offer when he had the chance." He shook his head in mock sadness. "But no matter. His debt's being settled now, with interest." Amanda glared up at him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Instead, she began silently counting her heartbeats, trying to guess how long before the guards would be forced to give up their search. Somewhere out there, Thorne was watching, waiting, caught in an impossible choice between the baby he'd sworn to protect and the women who had come to mean so much to him. The night grew colder, and hope seemed to freeze with it as Pike's lantern cast long shadows across the snow. Pike strode across the snowy camp, roughly pulling Amanda along by her bound wrists. Her boots dragged through the snow, leaving twin furrows that glowed orange in the lantern light. The railroad men gathered around, their breath visible in the cold night air as they watched Pike parade his new captive before them. "See here, boys," Pike announced, yanking Amanda's arms up to display the ropes cutting into her wrists. "Another Whitley coming to settle accounts." His voice dripped with satisfaction as he guided the lantern's beam across her face. "Just as pretty as her mama, wouldn't you say?" The railroad men chuckled, their eyes glinting with ugly interest. Amanda held her head high, refusing to show fear despite her racing heart. She could see her mother straining against her bonds near the supply wagon, face lined with anguish. "Now then," Pike declared, releasing Amanda with a shove that sent her stumbling. "Time to make things official." He moved to his personal wagon and withdrew a brass key from inside his coat. The metal caught the firelight as he unlocked a heavy wooden box mounted beneath the driver's seat. From within, he pulled out a leather-bound ledger, its pages stuffed with loose papers, and its spine cracked from frequent use. Pike handled it with obvious pride, like a priest with a sacred text. He made a show of flipping through the pages, finally stopping at what must have been the Whitley family's account. "Right here," he said, tapping the page with one finger. "Your father's mark, clear as day, promising labor in exchange for winter supplies." He turned the book so Amanda could see the crude X scrawled at the bottom. "And now I'll just add your name right below your mother's, keeping it in the family, so to speak." "No!" Alma cried out, her voice breaking. "Please, Edgar, she's just a girl. Take more of my time instead. I'll work twice as hard, I swear it." Pike ignored the widow's pleas, fishing a pencil from his pocket to make the new entry. The scratching of lead on paper seemed unnaturally loud in the tense night air. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the camp, a soft whimper rose. Barely more than a whisper, but enough to make Pike's head snap up. Amanda's heart nearly stopped as she recognized Hope's distinctive fussing sound. Hidden in the thick brush, Thorne felt panic rise in his chest as the baby stirred against him. The cold was getting to her despite the blankets, and her fever hadn't fully broken. He cupped his hand gently over her small face, trying to quiet her before the sound could carry further. "What was that?" one of the railroad men asked, lifting his rifle toward the trees. Pike's eyes narrowed as he studied the darkness. "Could be that baby I mentioned." He closed the ledger with a sharp snap. "The one that should rightfully be mine." The second railroad man stepped closer, interest plain on his weathered face. "A baby, you say? Those southern plantations pay good money for young ones, especially girls. Raise 'em up right from the start." Amanda felt bile rise in her throat. "You're monsters," she spat. "Trading in children like cattle." "Business is business," Pike replied smoothly. "And speaking of business," he raised his voice, calling out to the shadows. "I know you're out there, friend. Why not make this easy on everyone? Bring me what's mine, and we can discuss terms that might benefit us all." In the brush, Thorne pressed himself lower as Hope threatened to cry again. The baby was getting restless, uncomfortable with the cold and her lingering fever. He rocked her as gently as he could, knowing they'd be discovered if she began wailing in earnest. Every instinct screamed at him to rush the camp, to fight, but with two armed men backing Pike, the risk was too high. Amanda saw her chance to buy time. "Show me proof," she demanded loudly, hoping to draw attention away from the sound. "Show me where my father actually signed anything, not just an X you could have made yourself." Pike's face darkened at the challenge. He shook the ledger at her, pages rustling. "Everything I need is right here, girl. Every debt, every payment, every contract, all nice and legal." His lips curved in a cruel smile. "Railroad companies already approved most of them. Once they get their copy of this book, ain't nothing anyone can do to change what's written." Thorne watched from the shadows, mind racing as he processed Pike's words. The ledger was the key, not just to Amanda and Alma's freedom, but to breaking Pike's whole operation. If those papers reached the railroad officials— Hope squirmed again, her small face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Thorne's heart pounded as he tried to soothe her, knowing he was running out of time. Soon the guards would begin a serious search of the woods, and he'd lose any chance of surprise. "Keep looking," Pike ordered his men. "That baby's worth more than a month's wages. Search every bush if you have to." The railroad men began moving toward the tree line, rifles ready. Amanda struggled against her bonds, trying desperately to think of another distraction. "My father was an honest man," she called out. "He'd never agree to trade people like property." "Honest men die poor," Pike sneered, tucking the ledger under his arm. "Your father learned that lesson too late, but don't worry. You and your mother will help balance his accounts soon enough." Thorne could see the guards getting closer to his position. Hope's breathing was growing more labored, her small body tense with discomfort. He knew he had only moments before she would cry out and give them away. Amanda caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness, just the slightest shift of shadow, and knew Thorne must be preparing to act. She silently prayed he had a plan that would keep Hope safe. The baby had already survived so much. She couldn't bear the thought of her falling into Pike's cruel hands. "The night's getting colder," Pike announced, clearly enjoying his power over the situation. "That little one won't last long out there without proper care. Be reasonable. Bring her to me now, and maybe I'll consider being generous with your own contract terms." The guards had spread out, moving in a careful pattern through the trees. Their boots crunched in the snow as they drew steadily closer to where Thorne huddled with Hope. The baby's breathing hitched, a sure sign she was about to cry out. Thorne knew his moment of choice had arrived. He could retreat deeper into the forest with Hope, leaving Amanda and Alma to Pike's mercy. Or he could act now, before the guards discovered his hiding place. The ledger under Pike's arm seemed to mock him, filled with false contracts that could destroy so many lives. Amanda held her breath, watching the shadows where she knew Thorne must be hidden. Everything hung balanced on the edge of a knife: their freedom, Hope's safety, Pike's cruel empire of paper and lies. She saw Pike wave the guards toward a dense patch of brush, and her heart clenched with fear. The night seemed to grow colder with each passing second, as Thorne prepared himself for what must come next. The lamplight cast long shadows across the snow as Thorne stepped from the darkness, his hands raised high to show he carried no weapons. The sudden appearance of the mountain man made Pike's guards start, their rifles swinging toward his broad frame. But Thorne kept his movements slow and deliberate, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the cold night air. "I have a proposition for you, Pike," Thorne said, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Something worth more than these women." Pike's eyebrows rose with interest, though his smile remained cruel. "And what might that be?" "The missing ledger pages." Thorne's words hit their mark. Pike's smile faltered for just an instant. "The ones you've been searching for. The ones that could ruin everything you've built." Amanda watched in confusion as Pike's confident demeanor cracked slightly. The merchant's hands tightened on his ledger, knuckles white against the worn leather. Even the railroad men seemed to lean forward, their attention caught by this new development. "Those pages burned months ago," Pike said, but uncertainty threaded through his voice. "I made sure of it myself." "Did you?" Thorne reached slowly into his coat, movements careful under the guard's watchful eyes. "Then I suppose these wouldn't interest you." He withdrew a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth, its contents clearly papers of some kind. Pike's eyes locked onto the package like a hawk spotting prey, and Amanda saw real fear flash across his face before he could hide it. "Let Amanda and Alma go," Thorne continued. "Give your word to leave this region and never return. In exchange, these papers are yours." Pike barked out a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "You expect me to believe you'd just hand over such valuable leverage?" "I expect you to recognize a fair trade when you see one." Thorne's calm tone carried an edge of steel. "2 innocent women for some old papers. Seems more than generous to me." The railroad men exchanged glances, their interest clearly piqued. One of them stepped closer to Pike, speaking in a low voice. "Might be worth hearing him out, Pike. Company won't take kindly to any irregular contracts coming to light." Amanda held her breath as Pike's face twisted with barely contained rage. She could see him calculating, weighing his options as his fingers drummed against the ledger under his arm. The night seemed to grow colder with each passing moment of silence. Finally, Pike gave a sharp nod. "Cut them loose," he ordered one of his men. "But don't let our mountain friend here move an inch." The guard moved forward with a knife, sawing through the ropes binding Amanda's wrists. She bit back a gasp as feeling rushed back into her numbed hands. Across the camp, Alma's bonds were cut as well, and both women were roughly pushed toward Thorne. Amanda stumbled slightly, and her mother caught her arm, steadying her. They pressed close together, hearts pounding as Pike approached Thorne with measured steps. "The papers first," Pike demanded, holding out his hand. Thorne shook his head. "Let them get clear first." "You're not in a position to make demands," Pike snarled, but Thorne stood his ground. "Neither are you," he replied evenly. "One word from me to the right people about what's in these pages, and your entire operation crumbles." Pike's face darkened with fury, but he gestured sharply to his men. "Let them pass, but keep your rifles ready." Amanda felt her mother's trembling fingers grip her arm as they began backing away from the camp. Every step through the snow seemed to take an eternity, the crunch of their boots impossibly loud in the tense silence. When they had put several yards between themselves and Pike's men, Thorne slowly extended the bundle. "A fair trade, as promised." Pike lunged forward and snatched the package from Thorne's hand. In the same motion, he barked out an order. "Take him!" The guard surged forward, but Thorne was already moving. He positioned himself between the armed men and the deeper shadows where Amanda knew hope must be hidden. His broad shoulders formed a living barrier, and though he still held his hands away from his weapons, his stance made it clear he wouldn't be moved easily. "Stand aside," one of the railroad men ordered, rifle aimed at Thorne's chest. "No." The single word carried all the unmovable weight of the mountains themselves. Pike had torn open the oilcloth package, greedily examining the papers within. His face showed a mix of triumph and relief as he verified their contents. "You've made a fool's bargain, Thorne," he sneered, tucking the pages into his ledger. "Trading away such valuable evidence for these women, now there's nothing to stop me from taking you all." "There's still me," Thorne said quietly. A baby's cry pierced the night air, thin and fearful. Pike's head snapped up, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Ah, yes, and the child. Don't forget about her." His grin widened. "I haven't." Amanda's heart clenched as Hope's cries grew stronger. The sound seemed to draw Pike like a compass needle to true north, his attention fixing on the darkness behind Thorn. The guards tightened their grips on their rifles, waiting for orders. "Step aside," Pike commanded. "That baby is mine by right. Her mother signed her over to me before she died." "You're lying." Thorn's voice carried absolute certainty. "Sarah never would have traded her child." "It's all properly documented." Pike patted the ledger. "Just like everything else." "In those falsified pages you were so desperate to recover?" Thorn's question made Pike's smile slip again. The railroad men exchanged another look, doubt creeping into their expressions. Hope's cries had settled into whimpers, but the sound still pulled at Amanda's heart. She wanted desperately to go to the baby, to comfort her, but she knew any movement might trigger violence. "Those papers you just handed over," Pike said slowly, dangerous anger building in his voice. "They were supposed to be the only evidence of my creative bookkeeping, and you just gave them up for these women." His laugh held no humor. "So what's stopping me from taking what I want now?" "Honor," Alma spoke up suddenly, her quiet voice carrying clearly through the cold air. "Decency. The fact that even your railroad friends might balk at stealing an innocent baby." The guards shifted uncomfortably, and Pike shot them a warning glare. "The company pays us to enforce contracts," one of them muttered, "not to snatch infants." "The contract is in the ledger," Pike insisted, but his voice held a note of desperation now. "Everything is properly documented." "And those pages you just said were falsified?" The second guard lowered his rifle slightly. "Think we need to take a closer look at that book of yours, Pike." Thorn hadn't moved from his protective stance, but Amanda could see the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as the guard's loyalty began to waver. Pike's face had gone nearly purple with rage as his careful plans unraveled around him. "You're all fools," Pike spat. "That baby is worth a fortune to the right buyers, and now, thanks to our mountain friend's nobility, I have everything I need to prove she's mine." He clutched the ledger to his chest possessively. "You have a book of lies," Thorn corrected quietly, "and now everyone knows it." The guards lowered their rifles completely, stepping back from Thorn with clear unease. Pike looked between them, seeing his support crumbling. His hand crept toward the pistol at his hip, but the railroad men noticed the movement. "Don't try it," the first guard warned, turning his rifle toward Pike. "We need to see those papers, all of them. The company won't take kindly to being deceived." Pike's fingers twitched away from his gun. His face had gone pale, his earlier confidence replaced by naked fear as he clutched his precious ledger. Every lie, every false contract, every illegal trade he'd ever recorded, all of it was about to be exposed. Amanda moved closer to Thorn, her mother at her side. Hope's whimpers had quieted, but the night air was growing colder. They needed to get the baby somewhere warm soon. "It's over, Pike," Thorn said softly. "Let it end here." Pike's eyes darted between the guards, the ledger, and the darkness where Hope lay hidden. Amanda could almost see him calculating odds, weighing desperate options. But with his own men now turned against him, he had run out of choices. The sound of approaching horses broke the tension. More railroad men, probably responding to the commotion. Pike's shoulders slumped as he realized his schemes were truly finished. The ledger that had been his source of power would now become evidence of his crimes. Thorn remained standing firm, a human wall between Pike and the innocent child he had tried to steal. Amanda felt a wave of gratitude and admiration for this quiet man who had sacrificed his own security to save her family. She knew the trade he'd made, giving up evidence that could have protected him from Pike's false claims, had cost him dearly. But looking at her mother's relieved face, hearing Hope's soft breaths in the darkness, Amanda knew it had been worth any price. Sudden hoofbeats thundered from the ridge, cutting through the tense night air. 2 Ute riders emerged from the darkness, their horses sending up plumes of powdery snow as they descended the slope. Their arrival made Pike take several stumbling steps backward. "Brother Thorn," the first rider called out, raising his hand in greeting. "We have completed what you asked. The papers are safe with both the tribal agent and the minister in town." Pike's face drained of color as understanding dawned. "What papers?" he demanded, his voice cracking. The second Ute rider smiled grimly. "The true copies of your ledger. Every false contract, every stolen child, every lie, all of it delivered before sunset." "You've been holding only partial notes," Thorn explained quietly. "I knew you would try to deceive us." The railroad men's expressions darkened with fury. The larger guard grabbed Pike's coat collar, shoving him against a wagon wheel. "You tried to make us complicit in your schemes? The company will hear of this," the other guard snarled, reaching for Pike's precious ledger. Pike twisted away, lunging toward his personal wagon. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, and Pike froze mid-stride as snow kicked up near his feet. "Don't!" the guard warned, rifle still raised. "You're not going anywhere." Thorn touched Amanda's shoulder gently. "We should go," he murmured. "Things might get ugly here." Amanda nodded, wrapping one arm around her mother's trembling shoulders, while Thorn cradled Hope close to his chest. They retreated toward the tree line as Pike's angry protests and the guard's harsh demands faded behind them. "How long ago did you plan this?" Amanda whispered to Thorn as they reached the safety of the forest. "The day you arrived," he answered softly. "I sent word to my friends as soon as I knew Pike was involved. Some men can't be trusted to keep their word. But that's why we keep friends close." Pink and gold light crept across the eastern sky as the small group put distance between themselves and Pike's camp. The crunch of snow beneath their feet and the occasional whinny of horses were the only sounds breaking the dawn stillness. Thorn gently touched the baby's forehead, his weathered face softening with relief. "Her fever's holding steady," he murmured. "Hasn't gotten worse." Alma couldn't seem to stop embracing Amanda, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to Thorn, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing my daughter to save me." "We should head down to the valley town," Thorn suggested, adjusting the infant's blankets. "The doctor there can check the little one, and you'll all have proper shelter." The 2 Ute riders nodded in agreement. "We will ride ahead," the first one said, "to inform the preacher and sheriff about Pike. They will want to know he's been caught." The group rested briefly before starting down the snow-covered trail, moving carefully in their exhaustion. Amanda supported her mother, who was unsteady after her ordeal. By midday, they found a sheltered clearing where Thorn built a small fire. As they shared strips of dried meat, Amanda cradled the baby, marveling at how the tiny girl had survived so much. "She's as strong as her mother must have been," she said softly. Alma's hands trembled as she accepted her portion of the meat. "Pike never meant to honor any debt," she revealed, her voice bitter. "He admitted as much when he took me. Said our homestead was perfect for his schemes. A widow and daughter alone, no men to protect us." She squared her shoulders. "But he didn't count on my Amanda's courage, or good people willing to help?" The Ute riders mounted their horses, preparing to carry news of Pike's capture to town. The rest of the group gathered their remaining supplies, ready to follow at a slower pace. As afternoon light filtered through the pines, they resumed their careful descent. The narrow mountain trail gradually widened, opening to gentler slopes. By dusk, smoke from valley chimneys curled against the darkening sky, and the first weather-worn rooftops of town appeared below them. They made straight for Mason's livery, where Thorn helped Amanda and Alma dismount before lifting the bundled infant from his chest sling. "Need the doctor right away," he explained to old Mason, who nodded and sent his boy running ahead to alert the clinic. Dr. Wallace's small office smelled of camphor and dried herbs. He examined the baby with gentle hands, listening to her chest and feeling her forehead. "The fever's breaking," he assured them, demonstrating how to apply warm compresses. "Keep her warm and quiet. She'll mend." Amanda and Alma settled beside the examination table, their shoulders touching as they watched the infant's peaceful breathing. Thorn hung back near the doorway, his large frame awkward in the narrow space, unsure whether to stay or go. Reverend Matthews arrived shortly after, his breath still quick from hurrying. "The ledger copies reached me safely," he told them. "The sheriff's already gathering men. They'll move on Pike by first light." He turned to Thorn with admiration. "What you did took real courage, son." Thorn looked away, studying the floorboards. "Just did what needed doing," he mumbled. The Reverend offered them shelter in the church's side rooms, where simple cots and warm blankets awaited. As evening settled over the valley, Amanda and Alma made the baby comfortable between them. Thorn positioned himself near the door, his watchful presence a comfort to them all. The soft glow of a coal oil lamp cast peaceful shadows, and for the first time in days, they allowed themselves to breathe easily. Morning sunlight streamed through the church's small windows, painting golden squares across the wooden floor. Amanda stirred from her cot, instantly alert to a sound that made her heart leap, the baby's soft cooing. The infant lay between her and Alma, pink-cheeked and bright-eyed, all traces of fever gone. "Listen to you, little one," Amanda whispered, lifting the baby gently. She crossed to where Thorn stood by the window. "Here, she wants to see you." Thorn's weathered face softened as he took the child. The baby reached up, grasping his beard with tiny fingers, and broke into a toothless smile. Thorn swallowed hard, clearly moved by the simple gesture. Alma busied herself at the small stove, working with provisions the church ladies had left: cornmeal, dried apples, and fresh milk. The smell of warming porridge filled the room as curious townspeople began gathering outside, their murmured voices drifting through the walls. Reverend Matthews stepped in, his face bright with news. "Pike's in custody," he announced. "The railroad men have him locked down tight. Those ledger pages sealed his fate. They're taking him to the federal marshal in Denver." Amanda reached for Thorn's free hand, squeezing it gently. "You gave up everything that could have protected you just to save us." "Never thought I'd—" Thorn paused, adjusting the baby in his arms. "Never expected to care this much about any of you." Alma looked up from her cooking. "The town needs good men," Thorn called her. "Men who stand for what's right. No need to hide in those mountains anymore." Thorn stood silent, the baby still clutching his beard. His eyes moved from Amanda to Alma, then to the townspeople visible through the window. For the first time in years, the solitude of his mountain cabin felt less like safety and more like exile. That afternoon, golden light spilled through the church's stained glass windows as Reverend Matthews gathered everyone in the sanctuary. The wooden pews creaked softly as people settled in, their faces bright with anticipation. Amanda and Alma stood beside Thorn in the front pew, the baby nestled contentedly in Amanda's arms. "Today we give thanks," Reverend Matthews began, his voice warm and steady. "We celebrate not just survival, but the triumph of courage and compassion over darkness." The baby cooed, drawing soft chuckles from the congregation. Reverend Matthews approached with a bowl of blessed water, smiling at the infant's bright eyes. This child, born of tragedy but saved by love, reminds us that hope springs eternal, he said. And so we give her that name, Hope. May she grow in grace, surrounded by the family God has brought together. Water droplets sparkled on Hope's forehead as the church bells began to ring, their deep tones rolling across the snowy valley. The sound seemed to wrap around them like a blessing, making even Thorne's weathered face soften with emotion. After the service, as people filed out into the late afternoon light, Amanda turned to face Thorne directly. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Here in town, with us?" Thorne shifted his weight, his eyes darting toward the distant mountains. "Don't know if I belong here," he admitted quietly. "Been alone so long. Settled folk might not take to someone like me." Amanda stepped closer, close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes. "You won't be alone anymore," she promised. "Whatever road lies ahead, we'll walk it together." As if sensing the weight of the moment, Hope reached out from Amanda's arms, her tiny fingers grasping for Thorne's beard. Her delighted giggle echoed in the empty sanctuary, and something in Thorne's expression crumbled. "Reckon I could try," he said softly, touching Hope's small hand. "For her sake. And yours." Alma wiped tears from her eyes as they walked out of the church together. The setting sun painted the town in shades of amber and gold, each lit window a beacon of warmth against the gathering dusk. Amanda linked her arm through Thorne's, feeling the tension slowly leave his shoulders. Snow began to drift down, lazy flakes catching the lamplight as they made their way down the street. Each step felt like a new beginning, each breath a prayer of thanksgiving. They moved forward as a family, not bound by blood, but by something deeper, by sacrifice freely given, by courage in the darkest hour, and by hope newly named and dearly won. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.